Vaneshree Naidoo started her career as a mechanical engineer in South Africa. After an EMBA at INSEAD, she moved into infrastructure investment for a Swiss private equity fund. Welcome to Alumni Experience, Vaneshree. You started your career as a mechanical engineer for a construction company. How was that experience?
Right at the beginning, it was interesting as being a woman. I was, I think, the first female engineer in the company when I joined, and as a junior, I was wearing overalls on the shop floor. So it was quite a challenging environment. Firstly, being a female, being non-white in South Africa, going into the engineering field. So it was tough. It's a very tough environment. I mean, I remember guys sort of saying to me we were on the shop floor, and you had these massive machines that were being, these massive structures that were being machined, and when you project managing, the guys would say, "Well, if you want to speak to me, come and stand up here on top of this big drag line or whatever equipment it was, just to test you, you know." And I would do it. So I had the choice of saying either I could be stubborn and say, "No, actually, I don't do this," or I could say, "Well, I don't care. I'll prove to you I can do this. It doesn't bother me."
And then, am I right in thinking you moved within the company, but to a more financial role?
Yes. So at the beginning, it was heavy engineering, and then I moved into project management. And then you start moving into commercial management because you're managing not just the budget of the project. You start negotiating contracts. But the biggest change for me was in 2002. We had a separate arm of the construction company, which was called the concession arm, which was the bidding and investment arm of the construction company. And they were then, at that time, bidding for Gautrain, which was the first high-speed rail and underground in South Africa, I think in Africa. And they were looking for someone that understood the engineering, project management, and commercial side that could transition now into the investment side as well. And so that was the key moment when I moved from typical engineering into this cross between engineering and finance.
You mentioned Gautrain, which is the new rail link between Pretoria and Johannesburg. How was it to work on such a significant project?
I think it was exciting to be being able to be at the higher level where you actually had the overview of the project. We had a big financial model that controlled the entire, basically how the whole project was financed, the equity and debt, and how you finance this construction and how you would repay it from your revenues over the long term. And we were all sitting in a room to place the interest rate hedges and the foreign currency hedges. And it was basically online where we were getting feedback on what the current rates would be. We had to feed it into the model and see if we would get treasury approval on the spot for that amount of money. It was an amazing moment with all of us together in this room, but it was live, and there was a point where we were a bit even concerned that we were placing these big hedges for the currency, and you could possibly move the South African currency by this one placement of the hedge.
Why did you choose to study for an EMBA at INSEAD?
At the time, I found in my career, I was always the pioneer in my career, and my colleagues were always older than me, actually. So when I was looking at the different universities, which university should I go to? Should I go to something based in America or in London Business School or something to that effect? I wanted this international community, and I wanted people that were in the same, that I could relate to, actually. I think it was the first time that I could actually relate to peers. We were all going through the same kind of thing, and we were running companies or CEOs or CFOs or entrepreneurs, and I fed off that. That was the exciting part, was actually being amongst each other and being able to learn from each other and co-mentor each other to some extent.
After your EMBA, you worked as an advisor on infrastructure development and then moved into private equity. How did that happen?
When I was doing the advisory work, I was headhunted to move across to Switzerland. And initially, I was working as an advisor. But they had just raised some funds, and when we realized what my skill set was, that I had already been both on the development side of projects and been on the investment side, on the financing side, they thought I was a good fit for that fund to actually, which it was a fund for Sub-Saharan Africa.
How is private equity investment in Africa different from the rest of the world?
Well, on the infrastructure side, It's just that the projects take very long. From a regulatory perspective, it's sometimes more difficult depending on which country you're working for. So it's not so standardized. The approach isn't standardized. So you have to be more patient, and you have to come up with ways of overcoming the obstacles in Africa, where there might be a lack of institutions or a lack of capacity, even on a government side, even on the private sector side. So it's more complex.
Okay, so given that lack of infrastructure, are there huge opportunities for private equity in sub-Saharan Africa?
There's a big need for electricity and power generation and related industries in Africa. In the last, I think it was the last 3 years, there was a big boost in renewable projects in Africa. And I think it started off first with South Africa running a renewable energy program, and lots of investors flocked to South Africa for this competitive process. And now it's moved throughout the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. And I think investors are realizing that Africa is it's a great place where you can actually produce these amazing returns. And so now there are more and more funds that are seeking opportunities in Africa. So it is becoming more competitive as well, because there is more money flowing in.